I call this story Nashville, Tennessee, 1982, of a parrot, a ferret, and a drunk. In 1982, I was living in Nashville in an old rundown Victorian house near Vanderbilt University that had been divided into apartments. I shared a 2-bedroom with a bath and a small combined living room and kitchen with a roommate, David S. He was from Maryville in the Knoxville area and heir to a regional chain of department stores that were eventually bought out by Belk's. David had a stipend, and I think they had sent him on to Nashville to get him out of town. He wasn't given to working much and mostly preferring to drink, drug, and party 24/7 if possible, a subject I'll return to later. Anyway, David was fond of uncommon pets. He had 2 at the time, a parrot with an absolutely nasty disposition named Henry, and an equally obnoxious female ferret whose name I have gratefully forgotten. Henry the parrot was always on his best behavior when David was home, but a total terror when he and I were alone. Henry really had it in for me. Whenever I came home and David was out, Henry would wait in hiding until I got inside, and before I could make it to the safety of my room, make a dive bomb run at my head from behind, screeching at the top of his voice, "Awk! Awk! Henry doesn't like you! Awk! Awk! Henry doesn't like you!" No joke, that parrot hated me, and I hated that parrot. I never did figure out how no matter how quietly and tentatively I tried to slip into the apartment, he still managed to hide and then hit me in the head at a speed slightly less than the speed of sound while screaming his head off. The ferret wasn't any better. Somehow or another, David got the idea that he could supplement his stipend and get a little extra drinking and drugging money by breeding ferrets. Not the brightest idea he ever had, but then sober thinking was not a major theme in his life in those days. I usually make every effort to keep the door to my bedroom closed to keep Henry and the ferret out. One afternoon, I slowly opened the front door, keeping my eye out for Henry, dashed to my bedroom. Just as I reached the door, Henry smacked in the back of my head, flying into my bedroom screeching, "Henry doesn't like you!" Out the side of my eye, I saw a movement in my partially open sock drawer. I opened the drawer and there was the female ferret and what appeared to be a dozen newly born kits. I was really pissed at Henry's attack, and this pushed me over the limit. I foolishly reached down to grab Mama Ferret. She jumped up and bit me through the forearm, locking her long, needle-sharp teeth overlapping the upper and lower incisors. I screamed, jerking her out of the drawer. The irate ferret firmly locked on my forearm, and I began jumping up and down and dancing around the room and wildly swinging the ferret over my head in circles. It was at this moment that Henry, the parrot, in his wisdom, decided to renew his attack on my head along with his typical hostile commentary. In the process of madly swinging the ferret around, firmly attached to my forearm, I managed to land a solid blow with the ferret to Henry, who immediately decided to retreat to the relative safety of the living room. I finally managed to pry the ferret's mouth open just as David arrived home. He drove me to Vanderbilt Hospital's emergency room, where I received a tetanus shot, and they used a very long and very large needle to drain the hematoma the size of a baseball on my forearm. A few weeks later, I came home to a totally ransacked apartment. It was obvious that we were the victim of a burglary. As I went into my room, I saw that Mama Ferret and her young kits were back in the sock drawer, which had been pulled out of the chest of drawers and dumped on the floor. As I turned to go call the police, I heard a strange sound coming from inside the closed door of a large walk-in closet in my room. I started to open the door and I heard a voice whimpering, "Don't let him get me. Please don't let him get me." I said, "Stay where you are and I won't let them get you." I had a pretty good idea he was talking about Henry the Parrot and Mama Ferret. The police showed up pretty quickly. They removed a skinny little black guy from the back of the closet where he was hidden under a pile of clothes. He was a bloody mess from head to toe. Henry the Parrot and Mama Ferret had done a real job on him. I never saw anyone so glad to get arrested. The whole time that they were looking at hooking him up, he was looking wide-eyed around the room, saying over and over again, "Don't let him get me, don't let him get me." That was the final straw. I moved out a couple of days later, but it was not the end of my adventures with David. A few weeks later, after I moved out one Monday morning, I got a call from a mutual friend asking if I could pick David up at Vanderbilt Hospital. It seems over the weekend, David got drunk and decided to take a drive with his latest girlfriend out to Old Hickory Reservoir, where he backed up his big old Cadillac to a row of boats on trailers lined up along the shoreline. Bringing the car to the stop, David rolled out, staggered to the rear where he proceeded to hitch one of the boats on a trailer up to his car and pulled off. As he drove off, his new girlfriend, who had no idea who she was dealing with, asked him what he was doing. David replied, "Don't worry, babe, I just bought this boat." Well, he didn't make it 3 miles back to I-40 before being surrounded by Davidson County's finest and found himself carted off to Vanderbilt, where he ended up in the psych ward. It turned out that Channel 5 had been filming a boat dealership commercial at the lake and had recorded the whole incident on camera. You could hear the dealer and the announcer following the script when you see David's car in the background back into the scene. As he hitches up the trailer with a boat on it, you hear their confusion. "Hey, what's that guy doing? He's not in the script. Hey, he's stealing the boat." Then you see them running up the drive, waving their arms, chasing David's car as he drives up the ramp out of sight. Anyway, that's how he ended up in the Vanderbilt psych ward and that Monday morning. When I picked him up, he had no memory of the weekend's events. He had been in a blackout worthy of Justice Kavanaugh. To say the least, he was fairly surprised when I showed him the newscast I'd taped on the VCR and from the local 10 o'clock newscast. And being relatively wealthy, he had a pretty good legal representation and managed to get felony charges reduced and ended up sentenced to rehab and community service. Some 20 years later, when I ran into him at an AA meeting in Knoxville, Henry the Parrot, the Mama Ferret, and the girlfriend were long gone. And he had been more or less sober for most of a couple of decades. In retrospect, he was a pretty good guy, just a little bit crazy. So no moral to this story, unless it is that it may be a good idea to avoid nasty-tempered parrots, ferrets, and heavy consumption of alcohol. Just felt like sharing. Thanks.